The night was darker than usual, the skies swallowed by clouds that refused to let the moon shine through. Ilara's stepmother gripped the steering wheel with a fury that made the old car tremble. Her lips pressed into a cruel line, and her eyes glittered with a cold fire as she muttered curses under her breath. Ilara, only 17, sat silently in the back seat, her small hands clenched tightly together. She had no idea where they were going, but the sinking pit in her stomach told her it was nowhere good. The car screeched to a halt deep in the heart of the forest. Tall, ancient trees stood like sentinels around them, their branches stretching toward the sky, as if to shield secrets that should never be revealed. Her stepmother turned, her face twisted with venom. "You've been nothing but a burden since the day you came into my life," she hissed. "Tonight, you learn how cruel the world really is." Before Lara could respond, she was shoved out of the car. The icy wind bit into her skin, and before she could steady herself, the car sped away, its red taillights swallowed by the darkness. Silence followed, an eerie, suffocating silence. Ilara wrapped her arms around herself, trembling not only from the cold but from the crushing reality that she had just been abandoned. She stumbled through the underbrush, her shoes catching on roots and stones. Hours passed, or so it felt, until she reached a clearing lit by a faint glow. Her breath caught when she saw the source, an elegant black car, polished like obsidian, surrounded by men in dark suits with earpieces. And there, stepping out of the vehicle with an aura of command, was none other than the president himself. For a moment, she thought she was hallucinating, but the weight of his gaze on her face proved it was real. His sharp eyes narrowed as he studied the frightened girl emerging from the shadows. "What are you doing here?" His voice was calm, but it carried authority that silenced everyone around. Tears welled up in Ilara's eyes, though she fought to keep her voice steady. "My stepmother, she left me here. I don't know where to go." The president exchanged a glance with one of his guards. There was something in his expression, anger, but not at her. Concern flickered briefly in his eyes before his features hardened again. He motioned for her to come closer. One of the guards draped a coat over her trembling shoulders. The president studied her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Then, unexpectedly, he asked, "What's your name?" "Ilara." The name seemed to strike something in him. He repeated it softly under his breath, as if it was familiar, too familiar. His hand clenched at his side, but he quickly masked the reaction. "You're coming with us," he declared, leaving no room for argument. The guards guided her into the car, and before she could even process what was happening, the vehicle sped away from the forest. The warmth of the leather seats was a stark contrast to the chilling cold outside. Ilara sat quietly, stealing glances at the president, who remained silent, staring out the window with a storm brewing in his eyes. When they arrived at a grand residence, Ilara's breath caught. The mansion was unlike anything she had ever seen, glowing under the night sky like a beacon of untold power. She was led inside, where chandeliers sparkled and marble floors reflected golden light. For someone who had been abandoned in the forest only hours before, it felt like stepping into another world. The president finally turned to her. His voice was quieter now, but edged with something she couldn't name. "Ilara, do you know who your father was?" Her heart skipped. "No, my mother never spoke of him. She died when I was little. My stepmother raised me, but—" He raised a hand, silencing her. His jaw tightened, and for the first time, she noticed the way his eyes glistened as though fighting against emotions he rarely allowed to surface. "Ilara," he said slowly, each word deliberate, "you may not know this, but your father was not just anyone. And what I'm about to tell you will change everything you believe about your life." Ilara leaned forward, her pulse racing as the truth began to unravel before her eyes. Ilara's breath caught in her throat as she tried to steady herself. The room around her seemed to shrink with each second, the air thick with anticipation. The president's gaze locked onto hers, heavy and unwavering, and though his tone was calm, she could feel a storm raging beneath his composed exterior. "Your father," he said, almost as though the words weighed more than stone, "was my closest friend. More than that, he was a man who saved my life before I ever became who I am today. And when he disappeared, I searched for him for his family, but I never found you." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The revelation pressed into her chest like an iron weight. "My father saved your life?" she finally whispered. He nodded slowly, his eyes turning distant, as though seeing shadows of the past. "We were both young men then. He risked everything for me during a mission, gave me a chance to live when he had every reason to save himself instead. I owed him a debt I could never repay. And when I heard rumors that his wife and child were left behind after tragedy struck, I tried to find them, but it was as if they had vanished into thin air." Ilara's heart pounded wildly. She had grown up with half-truths and endless silences from her stepmother, who never spoke of her real father except to say he was gone, a man unworthy of being remembered. Now here, standing before the most powerful man in the nation, she was being told her father had been a hero, a savior to the president himself. "I don't understand," Ilara said softly, her voice trembling. "If he was so important to you, why didn't anyone come for me?" Pain flickered in the president's eyes, quick and raw. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "Because, Ilara, there were people who didn't want you to be found. There are forces that feared the blood you carry, the legacy you don't yet know you hold." Her body tensed, and she gripped the edge of the chair she sat on. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, his eyes flickering toward the guards lingering at the edges of the room. He gave a small nod, and they stepped out silently, leaving the two of them alone in the vast chamber. The chandeliers hummed faintly overhead, and the golden light seemed suddenly dimmer, as though even the room itself knew a secret was about to be revealed. "There are truths," the president said, "that I swore to keep buried for the safety of the nation. Your father was not only my friend, he was a man tied to a network so powerful, so dangerous, that his disappearance was orchestrated by enemies who wanted him silenced forever. And if they had known about you, Ilara," his voice dropped to a whisper, "you would not be sitting here alive." Her heart skipped painfully. She swallowed hard, struggling to grasp the gravity of his words. Her whole life she felt invisible, discarded, treated as though she didn't matter. And yet now she was hearing that her very existence had been something to protect, something to hide from those who might want her destroyed. I don't know what to believe," she admitted, her voice breaking. The president leaned back, his expression softening ever so slightly. "You don't have to believe it all at once. But know this, I will not let you fall back into the hands of people who wish you harm. You're not alone anymore." Something in the certainty of his words struck her deeply, like a rope being thrown to someone drowning. She blinked rapidly, tears threatening to spill, but she held them back, refusing to appear weak in front of him. As silence stretched between them, a sudden knock echoed against the heavy doors of the chamber. The president's features hardened in an instant. "Enter," he commanded. A tall man in another dark suit stepped inside, his expression tense. He bowed slightly toward the president before speaking. "Sir, we've received word. There was movement detected near the northern gates. It seems someone was following us from a forest." Ilara's blood ran cold. Her stepmother's face flashed in her mind, twisted with malice, those last words echoing. "Tonight, you learn how cruel the world really is." The president's eyes flicked at her sharply, as though reading her thoughts. "Do you know anyone who would track you? Someone who might want to harm you?" She hesitated, her fingers twisting together in her lap. "My stepmother. She never wanted me. She said I was a curse to her, but she wouldn't have the power to." The president cut her off with a grim shake of his head. "Don't underestimate hatred, Ilara. Sometimes the smallest flame burns down the largest house." He turned toward the guard. "Double the security. If anyone crosses those gates without clearance, I want them detained immediately." The guard nodded and disappeared as quickly as he had entered. Ilara sat frozen, her thoughts spiraling. The forest, the abandonment, the sudden encounter with the president. None of it could be coincidence. Her stepmother must have known something she had never wanted Ilara to discover. But how? And why leave her in the forest of all places? The president rose from his chair and walked to the tall windows that overlooked the sprawling grounds of the mansion. He clasped his hands behind his back, his silhouette outlined by the faint light of the moon peeking through the clouds. "You must understand, Ilara," You stepping into that forest tonight was no accident. You were meant to be found. Her pulse quickened. Meant to be found? He turned his head slightly, his eyes catching hers with piercing intensity. There are no coincidences in this world, only truths hidden behind shadows, waiting for the right moment to come into the light. Your moment is now. The weight of his words settled over her like a shroud, both terrifying and exhilarating. She didn't know what destiny he was alluding to, but she could feel it. Something larger than herself, larger than anything she had ever imagined, was pulling her forward. And yet, deep in her heart, fear still gnawed at her. Because if her stepmother had gone to such lengths to get rid of her, what else was lurking just beyond the shadows, waiting to strike? The president seemed to sense her fear, for his tone softened once more. You are safe here tonight. Rest, and tomorrow we will speak again. There are things you must see for yourself. Truths I cannot simply tell you. But know this, Ilara, you carry your father's blood, and that blood may very well change the future of this nation. Her breath hitched, her chest rising and falling with the weight of emotions she could hardly contain. Safe for now, but as she glanced toward the darkened windows, she could not shake the feeling that the same forest that had abandoned her was still calling, and that the eyes watching from its shadows had not yet blinked. Ilara could not sleep that night, no matter how many times she closed her eyes and tried to still the storm inside her chest. The mansion was quiet, the halls echoing faintly with the distant footsteps of guards, yet she felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing against her. Her father's memory, the president's words, and the haunting cruelty of her stepmother whirled in her mind like a restless sea. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, until the first faint streaks of dawn began bleeding into the sky. By morning, the house was alive with movement. Servants carried trays of food and documents through polished corridors. Guards communicated softly into their earpieces. And yet, whenever she entered a room, conversation slowed. All eyes seemed to linger on her longer than comfort allowed, as though they already knew she was more than just an abandoned girl found in the forest. The president summoned her shortly after breakfast. He was seated in his study, surrounded by shelves of old leather-bound books and the scent of polished wood. On the desk before him rested a locked box made of iron, its surface scratched with symbols she didn't recognize. "Sit," he said, his voice carrying a weight that silenced her hesitation. She lowered herself into the chair across from him, her eyes flickering to the mysterious box. "This belonged to your father," the president began. His hand rested on the box, fingers curling slightly as though even touching it brought back painful memories. "When he knew his enemies were closing in, he entrusted it to me. He told me to guard it until the day his child was old enough to claim it." Ilara's heart skipped. Her fingers tightened on her knees. "What's inside?" The president's eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable. "Answers. And burdens. And a path that cannot be walked by anyone else but you." He pulled a key from his pocket, its golden surface etched with the same strange markings, and inserted it into the lock. With a click, the box opened, releasing a faint metallic scent that seemed older than time itself. Inside lay stacks of papers, faded photographs, and at the very top, a small leather journal worn thin from years of handling. Ilara reached for it with trembling hands. As she opened the first page, her father's handwriting stared back at her. The words were strong, certain, alive with the conviction of a man who had carried secrets too heavy for any one soul. Asterisk if you are reading this. My child, then the world has shifted. My enemies may have taken me from you, but they cannot erase what I've left behind. You are the keeper of my legacy, and though it may terrify you, it is also your greatest gift. Asterisk. Tears blurred her vision. She had never heard her father's voice, never known the warmth of his embrace. But here he was, speaking through ink across pages, reaching across the void of time to guide her. She flipped through the journal, each line unraveling a story of courage, sacrifice, betrayal, and the hidden truth of a network so vast that it had been silently shaping the course of the nation for decades. When she looked up, the president was watching her carefully, his eyes heavy with something she couldn't quite name, guilt, perhaps, or hope. "Ilara," he said softly, "your father was more than a friend to me. He was a guardian of secrets so great that even I cannot speak them all aloud. And now, It is you who must decide what to do with what he left behind. Her hands shook as she clutched the journal to her chest. But why me? I'm just a girl who was thrown away. The president leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper, so fierce it burned through her doubt. No, you are the daughter of a man who saved this country more times than history will ever record. You carry his strength, his fire. You are not a burden. Ilara, you are the spark that will light what he could not finish. The words settled into her bones, igniting something deep within her. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, not as an unwanted child or forgotten soul, but as someone who mattered, someone destined. Before she could respond, the doors to the study burst open. A guard rushed in, his face pale with alarm. Mr. President, there's been a breach at the East Wing. They've come for her. Ilara's blood ran cold. Her stepmother's shadow loomed in her mind, but this was bigger. She knew it now. Her stepmother wasn't acting alone. She had been a pawn in something far darker, far larger. The president rose instantly, his authority cutting through the panic. Secure the perimeter. Ilara stays with me. The mansion erupted into chaos. The thunder of boots against marble, the distant clang of steel against steel as guards clashed with intruders. Ilara clutched her father's journal to her chest, her breath ragged, her heart pounding like a war drum. Listen to me, the president said, gripping her shoulders firmly. What happens next will be dangerous, but you cannot run from this. They will never stop until they have you, or until you rise and claim what is yours. The door shook violently as another explosion rattled the walls. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The president's guards stormed into the room, weapons drawn, their faces grim. Ilara felt terror clawing at her, but beneath it, another feeling surged, an ember defiance of resolve. She looked down at the journal, at the words her father had written, and something within her shifted. She was not powerless. She was not abandoned. She was chosen. When the intruders finally broke through, expecting to find a frightened girl cowering in a corner, what they saw instead was Ilara standing tall, the journal pressed against her heart, her eyes blazing with fire that had been dormant for too long. The president stood beside her, unyielding, his presence like a shield. Together, they faced the shadows that had hunted her since birth. And though the battle raged to the halls, though chaos and danger pressed closer with every breath, one truth became clear to everyone who witnessed it. This was no ordinary girl. She was her father's daughter, heir to a legacy that could not be erased. And from this moment forward, her story was no longer one of abandonment but of destiny. The mansion trembled with the roar of conflict, but Ilara's voice, steady and sure, rose above it. You will not take me. Not tonight. Not ever. And in that declaration, the tide began to turn. Guards rallied with renewed strength. Shadows faltered, and the weight of history itself shifted in her favor. The stepmother who had once spat venom and hatred into her soul had tried to bury her in the forest. But fate had brought her into the hands of the one man who knew her worth, and through fire and storm, Ilara had found the truth of who she was. She was not a curse. She was not a burden. She was a force that no darkness could silence. And as the dawn finally broke over the battlefield of the mansion, casting light through shattered windows and across weary but unbroken faces, it was clear to all who survived that a new chapter of history had begun, not written by kings or generals, but by a girl who had been abandoned and who rose instead to become the very thing her enemies feared most, unstoppable.